Hey there, this is Darren LaCroix. Welcome to video 3. This is how to create a great story. If you haven't already seen video 1, check that out. The 7 reasons why great stories matter. Understand the why behind it. Really important. Video 2, that's about what makes a great story great. Understand that. But this is about the how-to. Early on in my career, before I was a speaker, before I wanted to be a comedian, I used to have a little public access TV show because I love comedy. So me and my buddies got together and we did skits, and it took me a few years, but then I decided that I needed to find the best teacher. So I found this gentleman. He taught right from Hollywood comedy writing for TV. His name was Stanley Ralph Ross. And I remember sitting in his class and got the opportunity to let him watch some of my skits. I was so excited. And he turned to me, he said, "Darren, you need to learn how to tell a story." That was a different perspective. And it actually got me excited because I love stories, and I had to learn how to go from skits to just being funny to having a purpose and a meaning and the whole journey of the story. So we're going to take you on a journey now on 3 steps on how to create a great story. So I sent out a survey to all my customers, literally thousands of people, and I got hundreds of replies. And I asked them, what were your biggest challenges when it comes to storytelling? And one of the ones I heard again and again was, where do you find your stories? If you remember in the earlier video, I talked about when you and I are sitting in the audience and we see this great speaker tell this dramatic story, and we wish that would happen to us. The problem is we're looking into that person's life, and when we see a great story like that, we didn't see the whole process of putting it together. So the key is, step 1, find them. Find them in your life. So let's take a look into your life. In a minute, I'm going to ask you a series of questions to explore what happened in your life. So I want you to be ready to take some notes, either on a piece of paper or maybe jot it down on your iPad or phone. But this is key because it's about you and where your gold is. So you have gold in your life. It's there. You just maybe didn't know how to look for it or where to find it. And then run the story through the storytelling process so it becomes great. When we see a speaker on stage, we're seeing the end result. We didn't see that seed at the beginning. So here's the key point, is you need to capture your stories. If you don't already have a story file, it's a simple Word document. You call it a story file and keep it on your desktop. And I encourage you to keep adding to it. Whenever you have an idea, capture it, write it down on a Post-it, put it in your phone, and then go add it to your story file, add it to your story file, add it to your story file. See, it's the key inventory for you and me as a presenter. The more stories you have, the easier it is to customize for a specific audience. So let's say I'm speaking to a group of bankers. I might have my core content, but if I skim through my story file, I might find that one gem that can relate better to them. Even though it might not be a perfect story, it might be more relatable in their world. So I might find that that content or that one story, can I pop it into the content I already have, and it makes it magical because it makes that magical connection. So here's the questions. Let's jump in. I'm standing here in a park, in a playground, because it's about your life. So question 1, growing up, who was your favorite childhood friend? What did you and they always love to do together? Growing up, who were your mentors or favorite teachers? What did they say to you that still resonates with you today, that you always remember? How about sibling rivalry? Who did you and your brother or sister always argue about? What did you fight about? What's that one fight that's so memorable in your mind, you can still picture it today? How about your first car? What stories can you think of that relates to your first car? And the key when you're doing this and going through these ideas, to capture the idea. What one thing that you saw that reminds you of that whole story? What one thing that was said that reminds you of that whole story? Just capture the essence of it. And this is gold for you. Another question. Did you play athletics? Or have a favorite hobby or passion? Definitely write that down. What do you remember from that? Maybe it was a coach or a scout leader. What did they say to you, or what did you notice about their leadership? How about buying your first house? What do you remember around that? There's always some great stories there. Or maybe when you moved from one city to another or one state to another. How about that first time you fell in love? What was that like? What do you remember from that? How about your first job? What little ideas or stories or vignettes comes to mind when I ask you about your first job? You see, these simple questions are just looking into your life. If you remember from video one of the reasons why great stories are great is that they're relatable. You see, I ask you these questions for a specific reason, is that you had a childhood friend. I have a childhood friend. You had siblings. I had siblings. You had a first car. I had a first car. See, that's what makes it relatable. So if I can emotionally relate, I'm more likely to be open and that story go right into my subconscious mind if it's well told. Did you get some new ideas out of those questions? I hope so, because your life is full of gold if you know where to look. But the starting point is capturing and finding those stories. Remember, the story still has to go through the process to become great. But at the beginning, we capture it. Another great bit of wisdom that I learned from Glenna Salisbury, past NSA president. She suggested, look for those moments of your life where you had a perspective change. Those magic moments in your life, and those are the exact same moments you should pass on to us. Those are the stories that you should transfer to your audience. That's where great stories lie. Because remember, video one, great stories drive personal change. So what are you driving? So I recommend pull out a piece of paper. And this is a 2 or 3 day process. Write down every lesson you've ever learned and realize all of those lessons, each individual lesson has a story behind it. Has something that happened that led up to that magic moment where boom, the change happened in your mind. Now, some of these lessons may lead to great stories, some of them may not. But if you don't go through this process, you're going to miss a vein of gold in your life that just passes by. Mark Brown says, you have a story to tell, and someone needs to hear it. Here's a storytelling secret for you, that you become a better storyteller when you talk about your passions. The things that you're passionate about, when you deliver them, you come to life. But that's part of finding them. Step 2, fillet them. I remember hearing Patricia Fripp talking about Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock says, all Hollywood does is take real life and pull out the boring parts. One of the storytelling challenges that I got from the survey is, how do you keep a story moving? Well, when you have boring parts, that's when it dies. That's when it's not moving. So what we need to do is figure out what we need to take out. So it's kind of like if we've got a steak here, this is like your raw story. It's cool, but we got to get rid of the fat. We've got to actually take a knife and cut some of it. A great story doesn't start out great. It starts out with the bone in there and fat everywhere. And so what you and I have to do is figure out what matters. What's the good part? What's the gold? And what's the fat that we need to cut away? What's that bone that's just that transition that's going to send an audience off on a tangent and take them away from this story that keeps the audience on their edge of their seats? It's a technical term, but a story in its raw form is guaranteed to have too much blah, 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 blah. So we got to get rid of the fat. That's filleting your story. It's a process. Sometimes you got to continue to cut and add and cut more, and it doesn't happen overnight. One great storytelling secret is the phrase determines what stays. Another storytelling secret is the more you work on your story, the shorter it should get. So one of the other challenges that we got from the survey is, how do you bring a story to life? That's a great question, because so many people tell dead stories, not involved, not emotionally connecting. So we've already taught you about finding them and then how to fillet them. But part 3 is how to fortify them, how to cook them, how to add that seasoning so your story is great. If I could give you one bit of advice as you start working on your stories, it's to tell your stories in dialogue rather than narration. That's great seasoning. You see, when I first went to my coach, Mark Brown, with my original version of Ouch, one of the tiny little micro stories, if you will, that was in that speech was about telling my parents I wanted to be a comedian. And when I first told it to Mark, it was in narration. And it was something like this. I said, so I went home to tell my parents I wanted to be a comedian, and they were speechless. They didn't know what to say. Blah, boring. But Mark taught me how to turn it into dialogue. So it turned out to look like this.
We also have friends and family that love us and don't want to see us fall on our face. Imagine my parents' reaction when, after stretching their budget to help me through college, seeing me fall on my face, and then I come home. Mom, Dad, I want to be a comedian. I was met by silence.
So did you see the difference? A huge difference. One was dialogue. The other, when I just told you a second ago, was narration, flat. And as Michael says, the purpose of story is to elicit emotion. So if we're trying to elicit emotion, you need to use dialogue. And here's the cool part. You can't react to narration. So you can only react to actually a dialogue being in the story. So when my facial expression went from this to this, the story was being told even though I wasn't saying words. See, that's really part of a great story, is that there's dialogue in there. That's the essence of a great story. One of the other challenges that was sent in to us is, how do I tell my stories so it doesn't sound like they're written? That's a great one. Here's the storytelling secret for that. Speak like you talk. Speak like you talk. People who are great writers, they might be able to write a great story, but when you come up on stage to deliver it, if it sounds like you're using eloquent words that don't come out of your mouth naturally, it's not going to resonate with you, and the audience is going to be able to tell that you wrote it rather than spoke it. So one of the things I recommend in order to do that, I learned it from one of my copywriting coaches. Because when I used to write my ads, it would sound like I wrote my ads. And he said, Darren, stop trying to do that. Instead, sit down and tell me what you would tell me over coffee. So it's a great starting point for your story. Type out what you would say verbally over coffee to a friend. So that's a great way. Speak like you talk. So you need to almost retrain yourself that you're talking over coffee rather than sitting down to write something out. A crucial secret that if you can get this, you'll get the essence of storytelling. And that storytelling secret is, if there's no change in emotion and at least one character, there is no story. If you think back to the clip you just saw of me telling my parents I wanted to be a comedian, you saw that at the beginning of the story, I was excited. I had anticipation. I couldn't wait to tell my parents. And then by the end of the story, after the emotional change happened, I was then distraught. So in this short 20-second story, you saw the emotional change. So you've got to look at your characters and identify what's the emotion at the beginning of the story and the end of the story. And there should be a clear change. And when you're telling your stories, that's what you need to communicate. Otherwise, it's not really a story, or you don't have the right part of the story. Great stories are about change. So one of the survey questions that we got and challenges was, how do you set up a story? That's a great one. Most people don't ask that, but it's important. So check out this clip.
It was 1994, just before a Toastmaster meeting. I was new, I was nervous. My club president, Dan Jones, asked me to help him photocopy the agenda. So we're in the photocopy room, and if you were standing there next to us, you would have seen reams and reams of paper on the wall. You would have heard the photocopy machine spitting out the agenda. You would have smelled the toner as Dan looked at me and asked me the question. He said, Darren, what do you have to give?
So that's one of my signature stories. If you notice, if you're paying attention in a very short amount of time, you felt what was going on. You saw the visual. You maybe heard something in that scene, and maybe even there was a smell that helped bring the audience to the scene. It's almost like in a sitcom, you see the outside of the house and a slow zoom, and then we go to the dialogue. Even though that establishing shot doesn't seem too important in the big picture, it's actually very important for your audience to have an understanding of where they are, so they're more likely to go along that story with you. Real life happens out here, but stories happen everywhere. Out here, in the parking lot, at restaurants, while you're shopping. Stories happen out here. This is where they happen. But this is where great stories are created. Stories while you're driving, caught in traffic. But this is where great stories are created. And this is where great stories are created. But you gotta capture it. But you gotta capture it. But you gotta capture it. Real life happens out here, but you gotta capture it. Have you gotten new ideas about how to enhance the stories that you have and how to make them great? Well, when I joined the speech contest in 2001, I thought I was a pretty good speaker. I've been doing it for 7 years. But I remembered from the earlier video, my mentor, Dave Fitzgerald, who said, Darren, stop trying to find those stories out there. Instead, take the one you have and make it so good, someone will pay to hear it. So in 2001, I decided I was spending so much time marketing, speaking as often as I could, and I had my day job. I was working 18-hour days. The one thing I wasn't doing was working on my stories and enhancing them and fortifying them. So I joined the speech contest in 2001. Let's say this was the value of my keynote speech back in 2001. Well, based on Dave's advice, what I did is I took my core story, my Stitches story, which was my district level speech. I took that story out and I worked on it. I gave it an open and close to fit into the Toastmaster format. But my whole purpose was to take that story and make it great, increase its value. So if I can take this story and make it better, increase the value of it, here's the magic of what happens. The value of my whole speech goes up. And Craig Valentine says, if you want to master peace, you have to master the pieces. So I use the speech contest to increase the value of one story, which increases the value of my whole keynote. But you've got to work on one story at a time. And what I tried to do with trial and error over years I had pretty good stories, but I want to help you avoid all of that work. So how do you avoid all of that work? You avoid frustration. You follow a proven process. When Dave Fitzgerald had said to me, Darren, take the stories you already have and make them so good, someone would be willing to pay for them. That was a game changer for me, but I didn't know how. So Mark and I, next week, are going to walk you through this process. We're going to walk you through the 7-step process of how to create a story step by step that is a game changer and leaves your message on the hearts and the minds of your audience. Look, this isn't just for speaking and presenting, which obviously that's critical, but it's also for your demo reel, for your speaker, if you're a presenter. If you're an author, it's going to help you sell more books. If you're a coach, it's going to help you get more clients. And for sure, it's great to have embedded videos with great stories of you and your customers and your clients on your website. So what does that mean? Join us for Better Stories, Better Business. Tomorrow is the last day of the early bird special. Use the discount code in this email or reach out to us and we'll take care of you. But tomorrow, this ends. The early bird pricing ends. So join us for 3 days. Better Stories, Better Business. We're going to show you literally the process. You're going to leave on Friday. This is a virtual program. You're going to leave on Friday with a new story or a story you had that was good that's going to be so much better. But more importantly, you're going to leave with a process that will literally help you tell better stories for presentations, for marketing, for getting your message to stick for the rest of your career. I promise you'll never look at stories the same way again. So sign up now, take advantage of the discount and the early bird special so you can tell better stories for the rest of your career. Go ahead, join us.